During the springtime, we often want to get out in the yard and start to prune some plants. However, sometimes it's detrimental to the plants to prune them at this time of year. What I want to go over today is how and when to prune certain plants here in early spring, or not to prune them, talk about the tools that we use for that, and also some different styles of pruning that you can use in your yard to make it more aesthetic. Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to go over here are the tools that I'm using to prune. So really there's two groups or two styles of pruning. There's selective pruning or informal pruning, and that's where we just have like a long leggy stem and we're just going to remove that, and we're selectively pruning stuff out of the shrub or the tree. And the other is formal or shearing, where we're just going over the top with a pair of shears and creating a shape, whether that be a circle or a square or triangle or however we want to shape it. So to shear, there's really two tools that I use. I have these hand shears here that I'll use for smaller stuff, and then on larger material, or if I'm doing the entire yard, for example, I'll swap over to the gas-powered shears. Now for my smaller pruning stuff, where I'm just selectively pruning like a branch off of a Japanese maple, or a leggy limb off of a hydrangea or something like that, I have two tools. I have hand snips for the smaller stuff. For larger diameter limbs, what I have is a pair of loppers, and those are the four tools that I use to prune with. I would say half the time I'm using shears, the other half the time I'm using either the loppers or the hand snips. It just really depends what time of year it is and things of that nature. So let's talk about when and how to prune several types of plants here in the yard in early spring. So the first group of plants I want to talk about pruning are hydrangeas. So hydrangeas, we really can have two different groups of hydrangeas. So the one in front of me here is oak leaf hydrangea, and we can group that one with the macrophylla hydrangeas, for example, Nico blue hydrangea. We could group these two together in the fact that we do not want to prune them until immediately after they flower, unless they have some dead branching. So for example, this one here, this hydrangea has not flowered yet, but I can already tell this branch right here is dead. So we can just come in and remove some of this dead material, and we're fine. So before it blooms, oak leaf hydrangea blooms for me in May. And so before it blooms, I can come in and remove some dead. But if I wanted to shape this plant up, I'm going to come in June and prune this or shape it however I want to. Here again, I'm not going to ever shear a hydrangea. I'm always going to use hand snips or loppers. There's a group of hydrangeas called the panicle hydrangeas. So if you have a limelight hydrangea or bobo hydrangea, those are going to be in that group where we can prune those in the winter and they're going to be fine. So you can prune those back. I've got a video on how to prune those. I'll try to leave the link up here above me. And I go in every winter, like January, and I cut them down knee high. And they come back the next spring and they flower. They're beautiful. If we were to do that to oak leaf hydrangea or macrophylla hydrangea, you're not going to have any flowers. You may have a few, but it's not going to flower like it should. So just when you're pruning a hydrangea, make sure you know the type of hydrangea and then go from there. If there's a single plant that I consistently see that gets pruned at the wrong time or not pruned properly, it's members of the genus Ilex, or the hollies. So hollies are going to flower on old wood, meaning that these are flowering right now. I can see the flowers on them. And then after they flower here in early spring, they're going to put out new growth. And so the flowers are kind of in the shrub. They're not out there on the ends a little bit. So if I were to go in and prune this right now, these flowers turn into berries in the fall and in the winter, and that's one of the ornamental aspects of the hollies, are the red berries. People like to use them around Christmas and Thanksgiving for indoor decorations. And so we are trying to prune in a manner that is going to preserve the flowers here so that in the fall we have berries. So what do we do with hollies? You should not be pruning hollies in springtime. wait until after they flower. They're going to put out a flush of growth. After that flush of growth comes out, you can prune off that new growth if you want to, especially there are certain hollies that get a little bit leggier than others, like a Nellie R. Stevens, for example. It may throw off a few wild hairs. You can go in and remove those with loppers or hand shears, or if you need to shape your hollies, you can shear them, but be careful how deep the shears go into the plant. So you don't want to go so far in that you're removing flower material. And even in late summer, if you were to prune in August, you may even see the small berries beginning to develop, but you don't want to prune right now. Wait for that new growth to come out. Let's get past early spring, late spring. Let's get into summer, let that new growth come out, and then if you want to, remove the new growth. The next plant here is Lustrum, or some people call it privet. This is Japanese privet, not to be confused with Chinese privet, which is highly invasive where I'm at here in the southeastern United States. If you have Chinese privet in your yard, I would suggest that you just cut it all the way down to the ground and plant something else, just because it's so invasive here. It's taking over our woods. But the Japanese privet here, it's not invasive and it does a really good job. My AC units are behind here, and our HOA guidelines say you got to hide your AC units, and so the privet here does a really good job. When do you prune privet? So these will flower here in about a month. They've already got flower buds on them. And so if you want the flowers on your privet, wait until after they flower and then prune them. So you can prune them in summer. If I prune these right now, which I'm going to do, and I'll tell you why in a second, it's not going to have any flowers. So why is Dr. Warren going to prune his ligustrum here? It's right here at the first part of April. It's flower buds all over it. I'm highly allergic to this plant. So if you're allergic to a plant, one thing you can actually do is right before it flowers, come out and prune it. I'm going to shear the mess out of this thing. I'm gonna cut it back so hard that it's almost all sticks. This plant's established. It's been here for probably 20 years, I would have to say. And it's going to flush right back out and be full within 3 to 4 weeks of me pruning it back really hard. So I do that for a couple reasons. One is, like I told you, I'm so allergic to this plant. I'll sneeze, my eyes water, the whole 9 yards. But also this plant gets almost too tall for this area. And so every so often I have to come in and renewal prune it. I'll cut it down really low across the top. So I've got a chainsaw extension for my pruning shears. I think what I'm going to do this year is come in and cut this down to like the 4 to 6 foot range and just let it flush back out and be a nice full shrub again. I'm going to group trees into one big group. I could go around and talk about specifically Japanese maples like you see here, and magnolias, and the list goes on, oak trees, but we're going to group them all into one group, trees. So what am I looking for with trees here in early spring and pruning? I'm looking for dead wood. I'm looking for diseased wood. That's the first thing that I'm going to remove from any tree. I'm not a big fan of pruning trees, including crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtles should just be left to grow. I see people doing crepe murder, what I call crepe murder, where they come in with chainsaws and cut the tops out of them every year. And that just leads to all kind of issues further down the road. Now, for the trees, I've already mentioned diseased wood and dead wood. Also, you want to look for branches that cross. So when branches cross and the wind blows, those branches rub together. That rubs the bark off and exposes the vascular tissue of the plant. That would be just like if you were to get a cut on your hand or your arm somewhere, and we didn't treat that properly. That's a site for infection. The same thing can happen to plants. So we want to protect the vascular tissue of the plant. So look for any crossing members, the branches that are rubbing against each other. We want to remove those. And then from there, I go a little bit on shape. So if I've got a limb, so this is the longest limb on this one right here. Say it came out another foot and it just looked awkward. I may come in and just remove that one section. I would go all the way back to a crotch where that limb connects to the plant. and remove it at that point. But other than that, I'm not doing any type of shaping on any of my trees. Trees are going to grow in the shape that they want to grow in, and the more that we cut on them, the more they're going to have suckers and cross members where the branches are rubbing, and it just leads to further issues down the road. So here again, look for dead wood, look for diseased wood, look for crossing branches, and outside of that, don't do a whole lot of pruning at all. Whatever you do, do not prune azaleas in early spring. These are ready to rock and roll. They are loaded with buds. These are encore azaleas, and so azaleas or anything in the rhododendron genus. So rhododendrons, azaleas are in that same genus. Azaleas set their flower buds on previous year's wood, so they're setting their flower buds. The flower buds that are on here now, they were set in summer of last year. So I want you to think June, July, August into September, they were setting their flower buds. So as soon as your azaleas flower, you want to go in and you want to prune them. If you wait too long, you get into August, September, and you come out and you prune your azaleas, you're not going to have flowers the following spring. You're going to be wondering, well, why did my azaleas not flower? Did I not fertilize them right or whatever? You cut the buds off. So don't cut the flower buds off of your azaleas. Immediately after they flower, come in. If you want to shear them, that's okay. I prefer coming in with hand snips and just taking the tallest limbs off. They tend to fill in pretty good by themselves as is. But if you want to shear them, you can. But here again, make sure, so these are gonna bloom here in about 2 weeks, mid-April. I'll come back in here and selectively prune these sometime around mid-May, the first part of June. We get into June, I'm not gonna touch these. Over the years, this has become one of my favorite shrubs, and in my opinion, it's one of the most underestimated shrubs in the entire palette of plants that we have here in the southeastern United States for creating screens like you see here, and the beautiful flowers. These flowers are huge, but this is Snowball Viburnum. So how do you prune it to get it to look like this? I really don't prune it at all. I just kind of let it go. The only pruning that I'm doing to this is in the summer, I'm going to go to the top and just selectively take out some of the tallest limbs. It does tend to get little runners that shoot up here and there. I'm going to go in and remove those. If I were going to do any more pruning on this, I would probably do it here in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So as these flowers fall off, I'm gonna come in and prune. You can shear these. Here again, I prefer coming in with loppers with some of the bigger limbs here, or hand snips with the smaller limbs. This plant here is gonna flower for me kind of all summer. It's got a nice prolific bloom right now. And so as this initial wave of flowers comes off, the petals are falling to the ground. I'll get sporadic blooms on this throughout the summer. So you're never going to have a time where you're going to think, okay, I'm going to go prune it right now because there's not a single flower on it. At some point when you prune, you're probably going to cut a flower or two off of this plant, and it's just part of it. But here again, get past this initial early spring flowering period, and then what I like to do is just come in and selectively prune some of those tallest branches or any dead or diseased wood as well. One of the few shrubs that I do like to come in with shears and just shear them really heavy are boxwoods. I love formal boxwood hedges. I've got some in front of my house. My neighbor here, they've got some hedges as well. And so what I'm looking to do is just come in and shape these up. Also, sometimes boxwoods here, we're going to get some freeze damage. I'm in zone 8A, and occasionally we can get down below 10 degrees. I think we got down to about 8 degrees this winter was our lowest low temperature. And there's just a little bit of dead in here, so I'm going to go in and selectively prune out some of that dead with hand snips. And then from there, what I want to do is just shape these with shears. These are more of an oval shape, and so eventually they're going to grow in together and be more of a mass, but for now we're going to keep this oval shape. And as this new growth emerges, we got a lot of new growth here, we're just taking the new growth off and shaping where we need to shape. So if there's an area that needs to grow out more, I'm going to take less of the new growth. If there's an area that's grown out too much, I'm going to take more of the new growth and get the shape that we want on our boxwood. A plant that has become very popular and has been bred for all different colors and shapes and sizes is Lur Pedum. And the way that I prune Lur Pedum depends on the growth characteristics of that particular cultivar. Some of them, they kind of weep over. And so what I'm doing with those, I'm just selectively taking out some branches here and there that may have weeped over too much, or a branch that's growing up tall. For these that grow upright, I like to shear them. Here again, this is one of the few plants I like to shear. And so Lur Pedums can look very good. If you come across it with shears, you can shape them into a nice hedge like we see here. So when am I going to do this? I don't want to do this in too late of the season, like midsummer into fall, because Lur Pedum, you see the flowers here in early spring. These flower buds set the previous growing season, on the tail end of that growing season. So late summer into fall, they're setting their flower buds. If I were to come in and say like February or March and prune this, I'm not gonna have any flowers. So come in about a month after it flowers. So here again, we're late March here. So I'm gonna prune these the first part of June. I'm gonna shear these back pretty hard. I'm just gonna take the new growth off of them, maybe take a little more than the new growth off of them to keep them below these windows here. The main goal here is to keep them just below the windows. And that's all the pruning we're gonna do. I prune these once a year and they do a fantastic job, but I don't want to cut the flowers off. So how do we not cut the flowers off? Here again is not to prune too late into the summer. So these are tea olives. They look a little rough right now. So they had a flush of new growth come out, and then we got down to like 18 degrees and it burned back the new growth here, but it also burned back the flowers that were on it as well. So tea olives are gonna bloom on new wood. So they really have two main bloom seasons. The primary season is in the fall, and then they have like this secondary season here in early spring. I can still see some of the little flower buds on it. It's gonna be fragrant here in another week or two. So I'm going to prune these immediately after they have their spring flowering. That's going to allow, wherever I cut back, new buds to emerge, that growth come out, and by the fall what we're going to have is a secondary bloom that's more prolific than the spring bloom. This is one of my favorite shrubs for screens. Also, the fragrance is unbelievable. I just love the smell of tea olives. I'll come in with shears and just kind of shear the top of them off and round them a little bit, or I'll take hand snips. If I've got a branch that's sticking out too far here at the bottom, I'll go all the way back in and just prune that back with hand snips. But just a great shrub, easy to prune if you prune it at the right time of year. Here again, you want to prune this early summer for the best results. If you want flowers on your camellias, it's vitally important to prune them at the correct time of year. So when you prune your camellias, depends on what type of camellia that you have. So in front of me here is Camellia sasanqua. It has a smaller leaf, and behind me here, this is Camellia japonica, has a bigger leaf. The Camellia sasanquas are going to bloom before the Camellia japonicas. The Camellia sasanqua, depending on the cultivar, is going to bloom anywhere from October through, say, the first part of the Christmas holiday season, somewhere in there. And the Camellia japonicas are going to bloom after that. So this is debutante here behind me, has a beautiful white flower, and we are in March, almost in April, and it is still blooming. It starts to bloom after the new year, so January and February, and it's going to bloom for me until mid-April or so. So all that to say, you want to prune your camellias immediately after they flower. So I've already started pruning some of these camellias here. So these camellias here, they've been pruned. The Camellia sasanquas and this Camellia sasanqua has not, but all I'm doing is I'm coming in with hand snips and I'm just taking off these taller limbs here, okay? So even if I'm a little bit late pruning in this style of pruning, it's not the end of the world. I'm not shearing my camellias. I'm just taking off these taller branches here. I'm not going to lose any flowers if I'm late pruning. If I'm shearing these camellias, yeah, I'm going to lose some flowers. So if you're going to shear camellias, which I would not recommend, they have a beautiful shape as is. Don't shear your camellias. go ahead and shear them immediately after they're done flowering. That way you're going to ensure you have flowers the next fall and the next winter. If you're coming in with hand snips and just taking out off these leggy branches here, you're going to be okay. Pruning a little bit later, you may lose 2, 3, 4 flowers that would have grown on these taller branches, but you're not sacrificing just dozens and dozens of flowers. So Forsythia is a deciduous shrub that has a beautiful yellow flower. It's usually in full bloom around Valentine's Day, here where I'm at in zone 8A. And I like to come in and prune these not long after they have flowered. I'm due to prune these. I'm probably not going to prune these this year just because they have such a nice shape. But all I do with Forsythia is in the early spring after they've flowered, I come in any longer leggy branches, like there's a leggy branch here, there's some at the bottom here if you can see that. I'll come in with hand snips and I'll just selectively take out those longest branches. I've never sheared these Forsythia, and you can see what a nice even shape that they'll have if you prune them correctly and at the right time to ensure that you're not cutting off the flowers. Here again, this shrub here is going to set its flowers late summer, so don't come in September with your shears and just start shearing everything, because you're not going to have any flowers, okay? So make sure that you're pruning this at the correct time of year. That way in February, to me this is the shrub that signals we're exiting winter and entering spring. I see this shrub flower, I kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, we've made it through the worst of winter, spring's around the corner. And so this is an indicator plant for me, and I don't want to cut those flowers off. So if you do, like I said, you're not going to cut those flowers off and you'll be just fine. So I've walked you around the yard, shown you how I've pruned several different species of plants. I hope this helps you here in springtime when you're trying to figure out how and when to prune the shrubs that are in your yard. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor, and until next time, happy gardening.